Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Charged by Emily Bazelon. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into an overview of the book, about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I will be reading for next time. Emily Bazelon's probably still best known for being one-third of the Political Gabfest hosts, which is a long-running podcast on Slate. She is a lecturer at Yale Law School, as well as being a writer for the New York Times. This book, Charged, is really her look at the criminal justice system, specifically really through the lens or prism of how prosecutors have disproportional power and are able to, in really worst case scenario, wreck people's lives, and how she believes that they're the key to, if there is any kind of reform, it must be done through the prosecutors. She kind of outlines or profiles is probably a better term, several different reform-minded DAs who have been elected into office the last few years. So Larry Krasner, Eric Gonzalez, Kim Foxx. So there's that part of it. The other reporting part of it is primarily revolves around two cases. One of them is a black gentleman named Kevin, who is roughly 20 years old when the book starts. He's caught a gun charge, and he goes to gun court in New York City. And he's allowed to enter into a diversion program to not have that felony on his record. And Kevin is a pseudonym, so it's really Emily embedding herself with this gentleman as he kind of goes through this part of his life. The other one is Nora Jackson, which is this kind of really tough and terrible case where this young woman within like a year loses both of her parents to two separate murders. She's charged with the murder of her mother. She's convicted on evidence that is maybe faulty. And the book is really about her section of the book is really about prosecutorial misconduct and how it can be used to really ruin people's lives. So there's a lot to the book. I will say, if you're someone who, I'll get this out of the way, if you're someone who wants a primer on the criminal justice system and areas where it maybe is not fair or doesn't work for everybody, I'd say definitely check this out. If you're someone who maybe has a little bit more information, if you're in law school or you've read similar books in the past, I don't know how much new information you're going to get out of it. I will say I think the parts that were done particularly well were the part on cash bail, where she talks about kind of how cash bail doesn't work as advertised, and the part on prosecutorial misconduct and how that oftentimes prosecutors are not held to any kind of criminal charges, even if the work that they do ruins people. And so those are the two parts of the book that I'd say are the best. If I had any qualms with the book, I think the book could have been better organized as far as the information. There's a chapter where in the middle of the book, where she talks about how from up to about the 1970s, the United States had comparable levels of incarcerated people compared to Germany or France or any Western European country. And then since the 70s, our population has skyrocketed, and other countries have remained relatively flat. So she mentions that some things have happened, including the bringing in new criminalization as far as new felonies that the federal government has put forward. She doesn't really go into details of what those are. Presumably the state took those felonies and applied them to state laws as well. So you have a list of new felonies. She also talks about the trial penalty. She also talks about how there are just more DAs I'm assuming due to population increases, and budgets have gone up for district attorneys' offices. So DAs and ADAs have just charged more people in the system. So that's all interesting. And you either, if that's something you're interested in, and really just came in from a place of ignorance, I think that would be really good. I think there are times where just her and our political opinions diverged, and there were some times where I was frustrated by that. I think one of the things to me that was lacking in really the entire book was the lack of a voice of the victims of crimes. There's a small part in the book where she talks about restorative justice, and I think that was worth noting. I think that that's an interesting idea, and I think something that we need to talk more about. But I was expecting her to have more of a victim's viewpoint for some of these things, to have someone from the victims' rights advocacy come forward and say, this is why we oppose restorative justice, or this is what we feel about criminal justice reform. And it's not really there. There's a part towards the end of the book where she's describing a case where a guy broke into what he believed to be an unoccupied building. He was a homeless man. He breaks in order to take a shower. He may have also stolen some material goods as well, but he breaks in order to take a shower. He does not realize that it is it's an occupied building. there's a pregnant woman inside, and because there's a pregnant woman inside, it's charged as a felony, a violent felony, even though no violence took place. And she is really adamant about him going to jail, but the reform-minded DA does not want him to go to jail because he, I believe, was an immigrant. He may have been deported if this had happened. So these kind of the conflicting things. And to me, it was like, this is the perfect opportunity for you, Emily Bazelon, to go interview this woman and see what she thinks. So at least her voice is in this book, and she doesn't do it. And so that to me was frustrating. I think that, you know, if she had gotten more to that idea of what we consider to be violent felonies, Kevin, the gentleman who is mentioned earlier in the book, I believe gun ownership in New York City, if you do not have a license, is considered a violent felony, even if you don't, you know, use it or aren't intending to use it, just basically holding it. And so that to me would have been an interesting part of the book if she had included more of that. But it is a very dense book, and there's a lot there, and I think it serves as a good primer. If you're someone who knows who Khalif Browder is, I don't know how much more you're going to get out of this book. It may be a little bit like preaching to the choir to you. But I thought that there was enough in there if you're someone who's coming in from the cold and you're like, well, why do the Koch brothers want criminal justice reform, and why does Grover Norquist, why are they pushing for criminal justice reform? And she gives you a little bit of that. And so seeing it from a little bit from the fiscal conservative side of, you know, we just spend, I think the number she gives is $15,000 to $70,000 per person per year in prison. So it's just a tremendous amount of money. And if there's a way that we could divert some of these resources to not having people in jail where they're effectively, their human potential is squandered, then maybe it's something we can talk about as a society. And so I thought from that point of view, I think she does try to, at points, include other voices in it. But overall, I thought it was just okay. I wish more of the things that I said, I wish that she had gone into more detail as far as the change and why it changed. It does have a real focus on prosecutors. So even reading it, there were times where we're like, well, that was a decision by the judge. That was a decision by the judge. The defendant decided that. She kind of just, let's focus on the prosecutors here. So there is a level of that as well. She does include, I will give her credit, she does include at the end of the book 21 things in an appendix, 21 guidelines for prosecutors and district attorneys, ADAs to consider when deciding how to charge people. Some of those things I agreed with more than others. I'm not a district attorney, so it doesn't really matter in my opinion. But it would have been cool too to have, I would have been curious to see a prosecutor's response to this book. That would have been interesting. Maybe it's out there. Maybe I need to do a little bit more research. But that is charged by Emily Bazelon. Again, if you're someone who is coming completely cold into the criminal justice system, I actually think it's a really good primer because it's a lot of information. Even though there are times where I think she exaggerates the effect of certain things and focuses on things maybe a little bit more than she should and kind of excludes other things that I think are important in the discussion. But from her, and again, I even think she would say that she has kind of her own political viewpoint on these things. And I think that even though she does, I think, an okay job of bringing in other people, there are times where I think her political viewpoint or biases were kind of clear in the book. But that's charged by Emily Bazelon. If you're new to the system and if you're wanting to learn more about the system, I think it's probably a pretty good primer. If you're someone who is pretty well versed in the criminal justice system, I don't know how much you would gain from this. I would say if you're a high school student and you're just trying to learn about the system, I actually think this would be a really good book for you. If you're like a first-year college student, I think it would be a really good book. But that's charged by Emily Bazelon. Next time I will be reading something called The Writer's Journey from Christopher Vogler. It's the 25th edition. I read this back in college, so I'm rereading it, hoping to learn more about The Writer's Journey. Until next time, if you have read Charge or if you have feelings about it and want to share those, please do so. I'd be curious to what other people felt about the book. I don't think it's really a controversial book. I think it's really just a matter of emphasis, like how much we should emphasize what things in those in that manner. So I would be curious what other people thought about those. So that's Charged by Emily Bazelon. Until next time, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Until next time, bye.